Carlo Messina thought he held all of Chicago in his hands. He was wrong, and the price of that mistake was exactly what it deserved to be. But before the story of how it ended can be told, there is a woman who needs to be introduced. The woman he underestimated, because without her, none of this exists at all. Nora Callahan was invisible in Dominic Ferrara's world. She had arrived in his organization 6 months earlier, a financial analyst recommended by one of his partners. 31 years old, full-figured, soft-voiced, usually dressed in quiet gray. She sat in on meetings, said nothing when nothing needed to be said, and did her work with such precision and such silence that the people around her gradually stopped registering her presence. That was exactly what she intended. Because Nora understood something very few people ever do. When no one is watching you, you can watch everything. Carlo Messina occupied what the city politely called a secondary position, partner to Dominic across several legitimate structures, public face of one of them, and a man who had long since decided that all of it should belong to him. Not a share, all of it. The motive was transparent. The terror of remaining second forever is not ambition. Alfred Adler called it the inferiority complex in action. A man spending his entire life compensating for a childhood conviction that he was never quite enough. Messina compensated loudly, cruelly, and in public. The humiliation happened at a business dinner on the top floor of the Palmer House Hotel. 30 people at the tables, Dominic at the head. Nora beside a side wall, folder in hand, waiting for her moment to present the numbers. Messina approached her between the appetizers. He was precisely drunk enough to say out loud what he usually only thought. "Nora," he said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, "I keep wanting to ask, do you actually understand how you look in a room like this? Like a sofa in a contemporary art gallery." A few people laughed. Someone found their phone suddenly interesting. Someone else studied the tablecloth. Nora raised her eyes to him. She did not flush. She did not look away. She held the silence for 3 full seconds, exactly long enough for his words to hang in the air and become his own problem. "Carlo," she said quietly, "you're right that I stand out. It usually helps me notice things other people miss." She turned and walked back to her documents. Dominic Ferrara showed nothing. He continued his conversation with the man beside him, but his gaze stayed on Nora for 1 second longer than it needed to. And he remembered. Psychologist Brené Brown, in her book The Gifts of Imperfection, describes exactly this moment, when a person who has been publicly humiliated chooses dignity over defense. It is, she writes, one of the rarest and most compelling forms of strength that exists between human beings. The room laughed, but Dominic was watching something else entirely. For the next 3 weeks, Nora continued to work, quietly, methodically. And it was in those 3 weeks that she found something that stopped her breath for several seconds. She found it in the numbers, where she always found the truth. Money moving through 3 structures that formally belonged to Dominic, but were functionally controlled through an intermediary. That intermediary, once 4 layers of legal fiction were stripped away, was Carlo Messina. He was slowly, carefully, and very patiently relocating assets. Not stealing directly, too crude. He was building a parallel structure that, over the course of 18 months, was designed to leave Dominic holding beautiful names with nothing inside them. She weighed her options for exactly 1 night. Stay silent, safe. She was nothing in this system. No one would touch her. Speak and step between 2 men, one of whom was capable of anything. She chose to speak, not because she was naive, because she had seen the numbers, and she knew she was looking at the truth. And the truth you see and bury becomes your own weight to carry forever. She requested a direct meeting with Dominic, no intermediaries. He received her in his office on Wednesday morning. She placed the folder in front of him, opened the first page, and began to explain, calmly, precisely, without emotion, exactly how he was being stolen from, who was doing it, and when it was scheduled to be complete. Dominic listened without interrupting for 20 minutes. Then he closed the folder, looked at her. "Do you understand what you just did?" he asked quietly. "My job," she answered. Nobody in that room understood yet what had just shifted between them. Messina moved quickly when he sensed the scheme had been exposed. He didn't know how, but something had changed in the behavior of the people around him. He decided to eliminate the weak point. He decided the weak point was Nora. 2 of his men intercepted her outside the parking garage on Thursday evening. They took her phone. They told her she would sign a statement confirming she had fabricated the documents against Messina, and that if she refused, the next conversation would be a different kind. Nora looked at them, nodded, said, "Fine, give me until morning to think." They let her go, because they believed she was frightened, because they saw a woman who would break easily. That same night, she delivered a second package to Dominic. She had prepared it in advance, copies of everything, duplicated across 3 separate locations, including an encrypted cloud backup. Everything that needed to be safe was already safe before they ever stopped her on that sidewalk. She had known they would come. She had simply been waiting. John Gottman, a psychologist who spent 40 years studying the dynamics between people, wrote that real trust is not built in moments of comfort, but in moments when one person witnesses another facing a choice. Dominic Ferrara, in that night, witnessed Nora Callahan. The ending for Messina did not happen in a dark alley. That would have been too simple and far too small for what he had done. It happened in a board meeting at one of the companies he already considered nearly his. In the room, lawyers, partners, representatives from 2 banks, Messina walked in steady and certain. He did not yet know that for 2 weeks, Dominic had been working with federal tax consultants, legally, cleanly, using the exact documentation Nora had assembled. Nora was seated at the table, composed, folder in front of her. Messina saw her and stopped in the doorway for a fraction of a second. She looked at him and gave the smallest nod, almost polite. The next hour was a methodical dismantling of every transaction, every date, every name. Messina tried to speak, to redirect attention, to reframe. But numbers are not opinions. Numbers are facts. And every time he opened his mouth, Nora turned to the next page. At the end of the meeting, Dominic spoke one sentence, quietly, without theater. "Carlo, you're done. Permanently." It meant exactly what it meant. Later, when the building had emptied, Dominic found Nora in the corridor. She was packing her documents into her bag. "You could have told me from the start that everything was already backed up," he said. "You would have worried," she replied. "That would have been unnecessary." He watched her for a moment. "I could have brought anyone into this position," he said finally. "I know." "I want you to stay." She closed her bag, raised her eyes. "On what terms?" "Yours." There are people chosen for beauty or for connections. There are people chosen because of fear. And then there are people chosen because standing next to them, you know with absolute certainty, whatever is coming, you have someone beside you who is already 3 steps ahead of the threat you can only feel. Dominic Ferrara could have had anyone. He kept coming back to Nora long before he understood why. Because strength that cannot be bought and cannot be broken pulls harder than anything else in this world. If stories about people who get underestimated and what happens because of it mean something to you, a like helps these stories find the people who need them. And subscribe, because the next story is about a woman who walked into someone else's war and walked out, having changed its rules entirely.